This is a video of Elisha Gullixson, longtime Subud member, has many committee positions in Subud over the years. And we'll start by just asking you how you found and came into Subud.
Yeah, well, like everybody, I met a Subud member, and he told me what it was like, and it sounded interesting. This was in San Francisco, and I went down to California Hall for my very first visit. It made me very uncomfortable, and I left and said, I guess I'm not interested in Subud. And then about 3 months later, it began to float around in my mind and kind of bothered me. And so I went again. And that time, I enjoyed it very much, just visiting and meeting the people. I did my 3 months of probation, which in those days involved sitting outside of the Latihan until the 3 months was up, and then you went and had your opening, and that's how I got open. Uh, my opening was, for me, it was very exciting. And I remember going to a helper afterwards and saying, boy, this is really great. That was really something. Where can I get some things to read on this? And the helper said, oh, he said, you can do the reading later. Just come to the Latihan. Just keep coming to the Latihan. That was Peter Filippelli, by the way. And that was my first lesson in that this process is not about studying, it's about surrendering.
Do you remember the name of the person who told you about the Subud?
Yes, his name was Lloyd Rice. He was a musician in San Francisco. He was in Subud, and he was the kind of a guy that kind of tried different spiritual avenues, and he was only in Subud for maybe another year or two. But he became a very good friend of mine, and we did a lot of music together over the years. He was a close friend.
So what kind of music?
Jazz.
And you've played the piano, and what did he play?
Saxophone.
Okay. So in your 3 months waiting to be opened in Subud, did you have any particular experiences that kept you coming?
Well, I'm a little embarrassed to talk about this, but the experience I remember in the probationary period was another lesson that I learned very clearly. On Latihan night, I was having dinner before I went over to the Latihan, and I was drinking some wine with my dinner. And as it happened, I drank a little too much wine that night, but I wasn't going to miss Subud, so I got in the car and came over to California Hall and sat outside and waited, just sitting there, being quiet the way only a person who doesn't know how to be quiet would get quiet. And that lotting hunt started. And very clearly, because I had drunk a bunch of wine, that lotting hunt blew me out of that building. It just blew me out of the building. I had to get up and go. And the message, it was really clear. It was like, don't come here and bring that. Don't do that. There's something here for you. You're not getting it if you come like that. It was pretty good teaching.
So how was the opening for you?
Well, gosh, there was so many people. It was really exciting. It was very active, and it was a very active opening. There was one other guy, and to this day I don't know who he was because I didn't know him. at the time and never did get to know him, and I don't even know who he was. I can't even picture him. I'd kind of like to know who he was because we got open together.
So what about the guy?
Oh, just because he and I were opened at the same time on the same night, it's just I'm just curious about who he was. But because I didn't get to know him and there was just so much excitement going on, um, I don't really remember that person. But later on, I came to regret that I had not made more of an effort to remember him or meet him. But a lot of people got open in those days, you know. And by the way, you were there. You were already a member. You were ahead of me by a couple of years, I believe. And you probably know the guy that I was open with, but we don't know who he is right now.
Yeah,
Just a
hard
kid.
to remember things that far back, huh?
Yeah, that's right. A long time ago. It's just a curiosity, I guess.
So do you remember what you felt during the opening or the any kind of experience that you did you move or anything like that in the opening?
Yeah, I really moved a lot. As for what I felt, I just I just felt like everything was was released. And so I moved a lot and I made quite a bit of sound, I think. Well, I know I did. And people afterwards people were talking about how that opening that night was was pretty boisterous and exciting. And I don't think for a second that it was because of me. It was just that's what happened that night. And I got to participate in it, which is really great. But you know, the subject of feeling something to this day, after all these years, I have a bit of confusion, I guess, about that. In that, for example, when we talk to probationers and tell them what, sometimes helpers tell them what they might feel, and I'm never too comfortable with that because I didn't feel anything. People talk about a vibration, and I don't know if I've ever felt what you would call a vibration, but you feel things like, as I said before, being released. And I remember over the years feeling different things, and mostly it's a very quiet release from your concerns and your thoughts and so forth. And you can feel that even if it's only for 1 or 2 seconds. You feel that, and it's really unforgettable. And there's never any words that you can describe it by. So it was the same on the night I was open, and it's been that way pretty much ever since. I've had a few experiences that were just undeniable. That I remember one time there was a visitor from Indonesia in the Latihan, and I remember being pushed up against the wall, not by a person, but just pushed up against the wall, which I needed because I was going to fall down otherwise. And then 2 nights later, I had exactly the same experience. And the only common thing was that visiting person was there. So I don't know. I feel like I kind of don't do very well when it's putting words to things. I mean,
Yeah.
these are things that I definitely felt, but describing them is really tricky.
So have you had many experiences being around Bapak?
Yeah, I would say, yeah, I'd probably say as much as the average Subud person. There was another lesson the first time that I was around Bapak, actually. That was in San Francisco. He came to visit. It was maybe less than a year after I was opened, and I had gone to work out of town for several months. So I was really a newbie at the time, but I was able to leave that job long enough to come and participate in the Bapak visit. So I was at the Latihan. Bapak was there. First time I had ever seen him. And I was kind of excited. Um, and so we were all just standing, getting ready for the Latihan, and Bapak said, begin. And when he said begin, I just happened to be looking at him. I was about 40 feet away or something. I wasn't close to him. And he said begin. And what I did was just continue to look at him. First time I'd seen him, I was still kind of excited about that. And I looked at him and I looked at him, and then all of a sudden, I've had these real things that I knew were real receivings just a handful of times in all these years, and that was one of them, where I was looking at Bapak and something very clearly said, just close your eyes. That's not where it is. It's coming from, and it was something was saying it was coming from above. And I've come to think that God comes from every direction, but at that time it was above. And so I was being told the same thing that Bapak himself has told us, that he among the things that he is, he's also just a man. And that if I was going to do that Latihan, I wasn't going to receive it by staring at him. But the message just came from out of the blue, so to speak. And then there were other times that he came to visit. And if you can get to those visits, you know how it is. You get there, you go. Um, I was back on the East Coast, living back there for about 3.5 years, and saw him a couple of times back there. There was a Congress in Hoboken that was pretty meaningful that we went to. So anyway, I've seen him a few times. I'll just leave it at that until you hit me with another question.
Well, do you have any feelings about those times with him, or anything special happen at that time?
Well, I've heard some stories that other people have told, and I don't have any stories like that. So it was just there was just a lot. To tell you the truth, I was usually on a committee when there was a Bapak visit. Um, like one time he came here, and at that time I was the vice chairman of Subud USA. So there was just so much to do, and so it was kind of like, I didn't have time to be quiet enough to have some kind of a big spiritual experience.
So are there any other times that Subud had a kind of a major effect on your life?
Yeah, lots. The longer time goes on, the more the deeper those experiences seem to be. And they seem to be, I've come to realize that all of us have different experiences, and the experiences that we each have, my belief is they're just for us. And I haven't I haven't tried very hard to tell stories about any experiences like that I have, because other people are going to have their experiences, and if they hear mine, I don't know what good that does. Maybe it does some. One time in Latihan in Seattle, my father, who lived in California, was ill, and I was in a Latihan, and I didn't think that it was the end of his life necessarily, but I was kind of concerned because he'd had a diagnosis unlike any that he'd had before about some polyps or something, and I knew that he was concerned. And so I went to the Latihan, and I was in the Latihan, and the main thing I was thinking about was I was thinking about my father. And then suddenly, even though my eyes were closed, but I saw my father across the room. I can still see it. I can see where I was in the Latihan Hall, and I can see where my father was. And we were standing opposite each other about across the room from one another, and all quicker than the speed of light, he came to me and went into my chest. And the main consequence and result of it that I remember is the next time I saw him, which was a week or so later, our relationship had changed, really changed a lot. And I couldn't help but relate it to that Latihan. That I had a lifetime of having a relationship with my father that I wish had been closer. But I don't think there was anything wrong with it. It's just we were kind of different kind of people, I think, and so our relationship was never. I remember I was always trying to see how I could get closer to him, and he didn't stand off or anything like that. It was just that way. But after that Latihan, the next time I saw him, we were real close, and it stayed that way for the rest of his life. That was really a wonderful thing for me.
Sounds like a gift.
Yeah, yeah. So,
Any other experiences you want to relate?
well, I'm getting a little forgetful, I notice, as the years go by. And I used to have a little sack full of those things, and I kind of have to, hard to remember them all now. I
How
had,
about,
yeah,
go ahead.
well, I had a dream about Bapak one time. This wasn't that long ago, maybe a couple of years ago. I don't know if this is worth it, but um, as I told you before, I had learned that lesson about, not trying to get next to Bapak and get something special from him and all that. I just didn't do that. I didn't think it was necessary. I thought that whatever I needed came from the Lord, which he told us many times. So I know I'm not just making it up out of my imagination. and I never had dreams about Bapak that I can remember. The only one I can remember is this one where he was giving a talk, and it was he was giving a talk to the men. And if I could say where it was, it seemed like it was in San Francisco, but it wasn't at California Hall. It was at some other hall, which I knew I had never been to, but I had a picture of where it was. He was giving a talk, and then he 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 began to get a little more forceful, and he said, you want to save the world, and you can't even surrender your own little imaginary problems. And he got up and he left the room. And I thought, wow, gosh, he's I've never seen him like that. And I went over to the window and I realized we were on the second floor. And I looked out the window and I saw Bapak down on the sidewalk, and he was getting into a car. And then I watched, and then he got out of the car and he came in the building, and I knew he was coming back upstairs. And I was a little concerned because he was really upset, it seemed like. Now, believe me, this is a dream. This isn't, I don't see Bapak acting like this. It was just a dream, and it was my dream, and it has nothing to do with Bapak's behavior, because anyway, as he came back in the room, I was a little concerned, and I thought maybe he's mad at all of us or something. And I began to get a little bit scared. And then because this is a dream, you have to go with this imagination. I thought, I've got to go where my Latihan is. And I turned around and I looked a little ways away from me. There was a spot on the floor, and I said, that's it. That's where my Latihan is. And I walked over there and got on that spot, and then everything was okay. Everything was all right. And that was really the end of the dream, too. So the dream was just depend on your Latihan. That's it.
That was the message of the dream.
Yeah, to depend on your Latihan, or that you don't have to be afraid of anything. You don't have to like all the things you have to worry about. You don't have to. It's just a waste. And because I've done Latihan for all these years, I told you before that these kind of things happen to me like once every 10 years. So if I relate a spiritual experience, it's not like, oh, that Elisha, he has spiritual stuff going on all the time. Not so. Not so. I have a lot of discomfort in this world. One evening, this was very recent. I was laying on my bed reading, and all of a sudden it just came to me what it was like to die. And for a second, it was very short, couldn't have been more than 2 seconds. It was just one of those glimpses. For a second, I died and experienced what it would be like and what it was like. And it was beyond comfort. It was beyond it was beyond the feeling that all your troubles have been. It was so different and complete and wonderful that even beyond my discomforts being gone and my worries and troubles, all my trials, as the song says, that even I knew that even the joys of this life didn't come anywhere near matching that. I was going to be, I wouldn't have those either anymore, like the joys we have in this world. Thank God we have them, But this experience, it was beyond that even. It was beyond all of our troubles and all of our joys. It was way beyond that. It was quite an experience. I wouldn't have things like that if I hadn't been doing Nottingham all this time. You know, I don't see that happening. A lot of
I guess
different.
you take the Lottie hunt as a valuable experience.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm not alone. I don't get to ask you questions, but I've heard you talk about the Lottie hunt, so you're right there, and I appreciate it too.
Any more experiences that you can recall?
One thing I wanted to add was say that was in any of these really deep, quiet experiences, they have always been something about the nature of God. In our lives on this earth, we are not going to experience the full nature of God. In even in the Bible, there's a passage where I think it's where Moses went up the mountain and got the Ten Commandments, and God spoke to him, but he said, "You're not going to see me. You won't see me." Moses said that he just saw a flick of something go past, and so anyway, that's I mean, when I say that's from the Bible, I don't mean to. I'm not trying to sell that religion to anybody. I'd like to know what it says in the Quran about things like that. You know, things that I've seen in the Bible, which I gave a lot of attention to several years ago. I often wonder what the Quran has to say about things like that. Sometimes I ask people who know, and I learn little things. I suppose I could just read it. I mean, why be lazy? But seeing something about the nature of God is somehow that's really important. I received in the Lottingham, again, this was just a couple of years ago. I'm just going about my business, trying to think of nothing. And suddenly I hear, God is perfect. And so it did make me think, I mean, in Lottingham, I'm trying not to think, pretty successful at it as I get older. But that made me think. And I thought, boy, this is such a gift, because what it made me think was, okay, where is he not perfect? Let me see. It says God is perfect. Well, how can you prove that? Where is he not perfect? And I start thinking about how God is not perfect. That's a dead end, man. There is no place like that. And the other thing is that in the Lottingham, one of the ways that I use to get quiet is to remember that God is always present with us. He witnesses every step we take. He witnesses every thought we have. He witnesses everything we do, the good and the bad. And if I'm a little disturbed when I go to Lottingham, and getting quiet is a little bit of a chore, then I remember that, and I remember. So what if you're not quiet enough? God's right there with you. I'll bet you he's not mad at you because you can't get quiet tonight. And all that stuff, and pretty soon I'm just thinking about him. I'm sorry about that. That's my landline. anyway, that's been useful for me to remember that he's present with us here, and he's the most important thing that's going on in that lot. So
So anything more you would like to say, maybe about your family life or your work life or anything like that?
well, yeah. Actually, I'd like to. I want to. I'm glad you mentioned that because I'd like to say something about my Subud relationships part of my life. But first, I'll answer your question, which is the Larihan seems to help you in your family life, your work life, especially for me, especially my work life. It's given me a means of making a living that I didn't have any plan to do. And when I started doing it, I found it pretty hard. And I had to relate to people in a certain way. And I thought this is not going to be easy, but it just got easier and easier. And the way that I can talk to people, it's all very natural now. I know it came from the audience. And the relationships with my Subud brothers and sisters has has really been a valuable thing because they, like all relationships, there are little variations, and sometimes hate to say it, but sometimes some people are not as easy to get along with as others. I feel like I can get along with people, with just about everybody. There was a time when I was young when I was smarter than God, and I thought I had a long way to go. Well, Jerry Chalem said to me one time, I was talking with him and I was complaining about another Subud member, and he was just listening to me. I was just kvetching. I think it was a woman. Remember, there were a couple of women that used to give me fits, and especially when it was committee stuff. Yeah. So I was telling Jerry about it. He was a good friend, and he was listening to me, and then he says, "Well," he says, "you've got a ways to go, don't you?" And before I could say anything, he realized that he kind of given me a zinger. And he was such a nice guy. He realized he didn't want to do that, and he says, "But then we all have a long ways to go."
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because when you're young, and when I was young, before I heard of Subud, well, I was looking for something, and I tried this and I tried that, and you're always you have a goal of some kind, like you think, oh, I'm gonna be a more spiritual person, and you don't really get there. And now I found out that I joined Subud, did the Lottie Hunt for a few decades, and I did get somewhere different than when I started, and it's better. It's a better place, but I didn't do it myself. I didn't have a book. I didn't have a book of Bapak Subud lessons, how to do the Latihan so that you'll be a better person. You don't get that. You just go to that Latihan and surrender, and stuff is given to you. And you don't know when it's going to be given to you. You might go do Latihan twice a week for 6 months and nothing happens. And then out of the blue, something happens in your Latihan that teaches you something. So, and anyway, working with people is just very rewarding. I'm a little sad to say that it's happened. That seems to be because of being older. it's harder to do Subud work. I don't know why that is, because I believe in it, but it's just harder to do it. I kind of miss it, and I do as much as I can. But anyway, well, that's beside everything else. It's all good.
Well, I don't have any more questions, but if you have any other things you'd like to say.
Well, I just have to say, I just want to emphasize how much I appreciate the brothers and sisters that that God has given me to recognize other people's striving. I call it striving. And sometimes, no matter what I'm thinking about somebody, I will get that picture of them striving. You can see how everybody does it. Everybody's doing it. And, you can't help but love people. It's like that. There was one other thing. I definitely don't want to drag this out, but one thing I noticed was that about 4 or 5 years into Subud, I had moved back to New York for that 3.5 years and became part of Subud, New York, and that was it was a big center. There were lots of people, and there happened to be some older people there who had kind of done the work to get Subud in the USA up and running. And it was before there was even a Subud USA. It was SIS, was Subud International Services, and those people were there, and there were quite a few people who were older. And what I noticed was that when I came and became part of that group, and it was easy to get it to be doing committee work, and so I was kind of working with all of those people, and what I noticed was it didn't matter how old anybody was, and I may not have noticed it at the time, but much later I noticed that we were all friends. I was 30 something, and I had a couple of people that were my very best friends that were in their 70s. And it wasn't because they were treating me nicer because I was younger and didn't know as much. It was just because we were friends. And I noticed that all of Subud was like that how old people were didn't make any difference. And then much later, when we began Subud, there came a place where we had the Subud Youth Association. And I found out that I kind of was uncomfortable with the separation that caused, because I had had this experience of everybody being the same, no matter how old they were. And I still appreciate that. And there, I don't feel like I'm any less close to young people in Subud that I know. So I hope they don't. But you and I were talking just yesterday about the experience of younger people coming to a center like ours, where most of the members are advanced in their years, and what that's like for them. It's not bad. It's not good or bad, but I think it's good that we recognize that is actually a situation that's happening. And, you change your behavior a little bit. But anyway.
Any of the names of the people back in that time?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, Reynold Osborne, Virginia Bonner, Sherry Farkas, Francis von Collar, I know there are more. Julia Schusterman. And those people did prodigious work. I know they did because Berindra was living there at that time too. And it was easy to talk to Berindra. You could, I mean, if you happened to be around him, you could ask him anything, and he'd tell you a lot of stuff. And he made comments sometimes about that particular group of people and how hard they worked back in the. It was back in the late 50s and early 60s.
Do you remember any stories around Virendra?
I remember a funny one. One day he just made it a point to come and answer questions. He wasn't going to give a talk. He was going to give a little bit of a talk. He was just going to come and do what he did once in a while. And so he came and he talked for a little while, and then he asked if there were any questions. And this young woman said, "Yes, I have a question." And he said, "Okay." She says, "What is truth?" And his eyes got kind of big, and it was like that question is that's not what we're here for. It's something. It was. I mean, I felt that question was impossible and out of place and everything. It was sincere, I know that. But anyway, it just kind of shut things down for a minute. And he didn't answer that question. He kind of he probably said something that was entertaining. But he used to, I mean, he lived there, so he showed up pretty often. And he was working at the United Nations. Yeah. But I'm glad I got open. What can I tell you?
Me too.
Yeah.
Been quite a ride.
Yeah, it has. It has. And and the whole organization seems to be going through some changes and that's the way life on earth is. There's a lot of changes, and I would like the changes for Subud to be on the positive side, and if we're worried about it growing, then let's receive what it is we need to do to be part of moving that along, and let's trust in God that He's watching it and that He wants us to help it grow also.
Any last words?
I think that was it.
Okay.
Yeah. My last word is thank you for asking. I didn't assume that I had anything to say that was that valuable. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm going to stop the recording now.
Gotcha.